someone who has actually come through the program, through the IEDP, and has gone on to do exactly the kind of work that we hope that we are preparing you for. And Rachel Jordan grew up right here in Philly, and like some of you in the audience, at least one person, I think one person was saying, she is a Central High School graduate. It was 262, right?
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to tell you that, you just want me to wait and figure that out, but most of you won't know what that means, so that's okay. And then she went up to Temple to do her bachelor's there. She taught in the Philly School District for about 5 years in Kensington. And then she decided to take a chance on the IEDP and came to us. She says we took a chance on her, so it depends. It's all about perspective taking, my friends. I think she and Richard may have been one of our first interns to go to RTI in Uganda. And our joke about Rachel, when we talk about her, we have her back, is that she went to Uganda and she never came back, more or less. She stayed there for 5 more years, and then eventually did move to Canada with her family, or maybe traveled around or did some other thing. Anyways, she did stuff. She's now in Canada. She's a mom of 2 lovely little kids. And she has, over the past decade, built a career at the intersection of education, research, measurement, and implementation, working in a bunch of different contexts from, I think, Cambodia, Uganda, now in Kenya, with all sorts of actors from the Gates Foundation, the LEGO Foundation, and of course with USAID as well, or what was once USAID. And what I find most compelling about Rachel's trajectory is that she stayed close to the questions that really matter to our program, right? How do we actually know whether an intervention is working and for whom and under what conditions? Today she's bringing those questions to a context that will resonate with many of you, refugee hosting communities in Kenya. And she's asking something simple. Can one size fit all when it comes to teacher preparation? So Rachel, welcome back. We're delighted to have you here. And
Thank you so much for doing that.
It's great to see you all. I understand that policy papers are due on Wednesday, so I really appreciate you guys coming out, and best of luck on those. Those are something that began with this program, and I remember stressing about mine, so good luck. As Dr. GK mentioned, I'm supposed to call you Melinda now.
yes.
Now that I'm a middle-aged woman.
Yes.
I've earned that right. As Dr. GK mentioned, I went to Uganda on an internship and never came back. I absolutely loved my time there. I came back to DC for 3 years, where I then segued into managing large-scale research, examining the components of programs that are shown to have impact, shown to be effective, working at scale through government systems. A lot of this research was funded by, as Dr. GK mentioned, the LEGO Foundation and the Gates Foundation. And from there, I was assigned to manage the Teach Well project, which is, it's my first implementation project. So really good at going into new and different countries and figuring out how to make the research make sense in different governments and in different contexts. But this is the first time where I've been on the other side and supporting a team of experts in Kenya who are working with the Ministry of Education to implement teacher professional development themselves. And I will say as a caveat, it is much more pleasant to go in and tell someone else what they've done wrong than to be the person that is now stuck doing nothing. So I'm actually really excited to take this opportunity. We're halfway through Teach Well to share some of my experiences specifically with this project, working in refugee and refugee hosting communities, and to kind of get your inputs and insights on a couple of things, because you have a very unique sort of lens of being able to step back and be more critical than sometimes we are when we're deep and 10 years into it. And I just wanted to point out, we are supporting teachers to test play-based approaches. And test is the operative word there, because teachers are professional, rational experts of what's going on in their classroom, and we cannot behavior change them. We cannot compel them to teach differently. What we can do is suggest different approaches, and then they will test them out and decide what has value to them. And it only took me about 8 years to learn that. So, just taking a step back and giving you a little bit of context, and forgive me for anyone that this is very repetitive for, and I think if there are any Kenyans in the audience, please feel free to correct me at any point. Well, I'm off the hook because, there we go. Okay, if I can't sit down again. So the Teach Well project that I'm going to talk to you about today is implemented in 2 counties, in Turkana up in the northwest and Garissa County in the east. These are both very unique counties in Kenya. They are remote, they're rural. They each house the 2 largest refugee camps in Kenya, so Kakuma in Turkana and Dadaab in Garissa. Between them, they house officially over 500,000 refugees, and half of those are children. And one of the ongoing challenges for these refugee camps is that as more refugees come in due to neighboring conflict and insecurity, there's a much lower and almost stagnant rate of repatriation and integration. So when we talk about the children now in Kakuma and Dadaab, we're talking about 2nd and even 3rd generation residents of those camps. So it's really been a protracted situation. And when we talk about the host communities and advocates for the host communities will point this out, they share a lot of the same challenges as the refugees living in refugee camps, and they will point out with not the humanitarian support or resources. And so a lot of those challenges are climate related. In the past 2 years, we've seen flooding, mudslides, severe drought. We've seen the diseases and the outbreaks that come with that. The diseases and outbreaks that come with limited access to secure food and clean water, and also insecurity, particularly in Garissa County, neighboring Somalia. Just in January, we had a teacher and a community leader were killed, and it's a little bit fuzzy exactly the details, but Al-Shabaab did claim the attack, and so it creates tensions for other teachers, especially those that are coming from other counties in Kenya, which I'll talk about in a minute. I should also mention that these counties have incredibly strong community leadership, and the community structures are very strong. These are counties that historically are pretty underserved by the government, and so they have learned to, if you want something done, we're going to do it ourselves, and we're going to find resources to do it. And so there's a real asset, a real resource there. Additionally, we've done some qualitative surveys with teachers, and despite all of the challenges they face, teaching mostly refugee children that have experienced trauma, violence, insecurity, the teachers continue to express a very remarkable level of empathy and understanding for students. And so I think it's always important that we don't just talk about here's all the things that are wrong, but these are the incredible assets and resources that those teachers are tapping into. So that's our geographic context. In terms of policy, I mentioned, so for myriad reasons, including security and economics, Kenya has tended to not integrate refugees as much as other countries may have. However, in 2021, the legislator passed the Refugee Act, which called for the transition of refugee camps to settlements within the refugee hosting communities. And this includes the integration of students, refugee students, into Kenyan schools. Now, this was already happening in the areas right around the camps. If you go to those host community areas, half the kids are already refugees. So there was some of this happening naturally and organically, but now it's being codified in policy. It has huge cost implications for the Kenyan government. If you're going to take on the students, then you've got to take on more teachers. And that involves raising the wage bill. And even though teachers are not paid nearly enough individually, there's a lot of teachers in Kenya. And so when you increase that wage bill, it has huge implications on a country that's already facing a lot of debt. The 2021 Refugee Act was put in place sort of as part of this bigger, and I'm sure you've talked about this bigger idea of burden sharing under the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework. And the idea there is just that countries like Kenya, like Uganda, tend to absorb, and many other countries I just focused here, they absorb a much greater proportion of refugees, and they house them, and it's the responsibility of further away nations, particularly high-income nations, to share some of that burden. And so this is the idea. It has not received, shockingly, it has not received the donor support from wealthy countries that it should. And the idea is that instead of having a humanitarian disaster and there's a surge of funding and everybody cares about this cause and a bunch of money comes in, and then all that money goes away in 2 to 3 years, you have more sustainable tranches of funding and agreements between countries to manage what is going to be a continuing and worsening crisis. When we first went into these areas, I asked the team, I was like, so, how integrated are things? And they said not. They said no. But the Teach Well project, LEGO Foundation is funding it to support that integration. So there's a couple of layers of complexity, and I want to talk about them with my incredible data visualization here. So the dark circle represents refugee teachers in refugee camps. And these tend to be people with maybe a secondary school level of education. They, oftentimes their calling is not to be teachers, but they're in a situation where, this is work that's available to them. They're not paid a salary, they're paid a stipend through UNHCR or one of its participating organizations, and they do not have any kind of national accreditation in Kenya. Some teachers do bring accreditation from other countries, but it's not recognized. And then in each school, there is one nationally certified teacher, and that usually is the head teacher. Within the host communities, this lighter green, so those are our national teachers who are from the county, and this is particular to Garissa. Turkana has more teachers that are residents of Turkana. In Garissa, this olive green dot in the center represents teachers who are nationally certified teachers who are not from Garissa. Okay, so that means that they are, not sharing the Somali culture, they're not speaking the same languages, they're not sharing the same religion. They are coming in and taking vacancies from other counties in Kenya. And so, for example, when there was the killing of the one teacher in Garissa in January, this caused a lot of panic for other teachers who had come from other counties. And so I think 66 of the teachers, or 2/3 of our teachers in 3 of the sub-counties where the team works, declared compassionate leave and will be transferred out because they didn't feel safe, and they are allowed to not feel safe. So it's complicated because even in the host communities, it's not like, you always want teachers from the community that they're teaching for so many reasons. Even in the host communities, we're not realizing that. So again, it gets back to this spending thing, this governance thing of, so, what makes the most sense is give refugee teachers a path to accreditation. Give teachers in Garissa that are from Garissa a path to accreditation. But we're going to talk about that. That has had some political push and pull, in large part because of the implications on the wage gap. So, I think that's, I already lost my card. Here's one other. We were walking over here, and Diana and Anna were talking about competency-based education. And so I'm so happy that all of your eyes can glaze over, because guess what Kenya has? Competency-based education. So Kenya put in place competency-based curriculum in 2017. And, in essence, it is a really good approach. They did a bunch of analyses, and the Ministry of Education said, listen, our graduates are coming out of school with knowledge of poets, but not having the skills that, this is nothing against poetry, but not having the skills that are needed for the workforce and the job market. So we're going to adopt a competency-based curriculum. This was, well thought out. There's some things about the competency-based curriculum I really like. SEL is incorporated not as a separate subject matter, but as a way of doing things. And in general, it was a well thought out and well aligned to sort of what the Kenyan government saw as values of their society. It is value-based education. So there are ideas of honesty and trustworthiness and leadership and dignity that are infused throughout the curriculum, as well as soft skills, 21st century skills. And so it is a really well thought out curriculum. One of the challenges is that after it was rolled out, there was some issue with the number of lessons you would give on a certain subject. So sort of more the scope and sequence, and how many times are we teaching this subject versus that subject. And so to address that, the Ministry of Education sent out a number of circulars. And we can now do that through WhatsApp. The communication was pretty efficient, but it did create confusion because there was, like, I think a series of 3 circulars that all gave conflicting information. And we know when any professional is told, okay, there's a new way of doing things, and then they, oh no, wait, it's this way, oh no, wait, actually it's this, people kind of shut down. And additionally, there was not a lot of resources to roll out training. So trainings tended to be spotty, and it depended on sort of how invested your sub-county or county officials were, how much you received training. So the other piece of this that we're looking at is not just this effort to integrate schools between the refugee camps and hosting communities, but this overhaul in the curriculum and this new way of doing things that national teachers are also a bit confused about. And enter LEGO Foundation. After doing a lot of scoping and consultation, the LEGO Foundation and the Ministry of Education agreed on a holistic project that would support the eventual integration of refugee and refugee hosting communities in Turkana and Garissa. And the idea is that we start with the teachers, and we are going to treat refugee and host community teachers the same, which it makes a lot of sense because even nationally accredited teachers, some of them, they will not admit it, but some of them might not be so confident in the classroom or not so confident with a competency-based curriculum. So it's important to design a professional development package that works for sort of any teacher. I did not do this, our experts in Kenya did, but I'll tell you about their work in a minute. And so this is RTI's component, is designing the curriculum for the teachers, for the in-service teachers, and including like an ongoing support model that's working through the Ministry of Education. In addition to that, Lutheran World Federation is one of our partners in the consortium. They're focused on that pathway for refugee teachers to national accreditation. And so that's a 2-parter. One is building up refugee teachers' content knowledge and language knowledge for those that are not native English speakers or native Kiswahili speakers, as well as working with the government and working with accrediting universities to develop a scheme through which refugee teachers can get certification. LWF also does most of the implementation in the camps because they already have a presence there, but RTI and LWF work very close in those communities. IRC, International Rescue Committee, leads the component that looks a little bit more, takes a step back and looks at the school environment, and so that's focusing on improving water and sanitation, hygiene, and also putting in place some mental health and psychosocial support mechanisms for teachers. And that MHPSS component has focused solely in the refugee camps to date, but starting this year in year 3, we're going to be rolling it out to host communities. And then there's kind of this bigger bubble around policy and advocacy and crisis response. And so the consortium with Save the Children serves on a refugee advisory committee that's sort of, that meets regularly with the government to talk through these challenges of integration. And the crisis response, that is I don't know if you've seen in different projects, they now have this crisis modifier component on a lot of projects. And this is just a pot of funding that's set aside if there's an emergency situation that happens. You do some planning around how you would quickly respond to different emergencies, working through the government, working through the presence in those counties. And so this is the sort of the approach, and the goal is to support this integration. We also work with African Population and Health Research Center. They're our research partners and our learning partners, and Film Aid Kenya. And so they are responsible for a lot of communications and community advocacy. So, I was gonna quiz you guys. So now that you're in the spring of grad school, you should all know all of the acronyms that we love to throw around in education development. And so I'm pleased to report that our teacher professional development design is not short on acronyms. So I'm going to see how well GK has taught you. Shout it out, UDL. Boom! Nice, ladies. And SEL. Very good. And I'm looking for LTP. Yes, I was looking for you. Very good. Okay, learning through play. That's a newer one. So when you write a proposal, you cite the acronyms, and then you get to thinking about how are we going to do this. And the team that I support in Kenya, Sarah Coco is our lead technical expert, and Linda Koch is our maths expert. And they have been doing this for 30 years, and they are brilliant. And they said, all of these acronyms, they're just good teaching. It's just good teaching. Should we just call it the good teaching program? And so that is what they focused on. They said we cannot waste a day of our limited training going over the theory behind each of these acronyms. We have to talk about what is good teaching? It's instruction that differentiates, that presents information in different ways, that creates a supportive learning environment, that allows students to practice, and learn by grappling with things themselves. And so the idea is we're gonna take away the acronyms. We're gonna talk about good teaching that is grounded in these, in these theories and approaches. And we're gonna identify 5 to 7 very practical learning strategies. They're simple, they're observable, they're concrete, they're step-by-step. They can be used in different subject areas, and we're going to focus all of our training on those. Using those, demonstrating those, adapting those, writing lesson plans for those, because you always have to write, it's not a training unless someone writes a lesson plan. And then the idea is that, teachers, again, as professionals and as experimenters themselves, are going to, of those 5, pick 2, try them out in their classroom, decide what works, decide what doesn't work, but in theory, those practical learning experiences expose the teacher to a new interaction with students. So maybe I only do it once, but I create a game to review some content I just taught. And for the first time ever, I have my students running up or calling out. And I experience noisy learning. And so maybe it makes me feel more confident, or maybe I just more naturally do another noisy learning activity later on down the road. And so the idea is that we just create these opportunities for teachers to test and experience and adapt, and then they can decide, what works in their classroom and what works for them. And ideally has these lasting effects. Now, do I think training teachers on how to make games is going to lead to a revolution in teaching? Absolutely not. But the idea was we have to meet teachers where we are. In the refugee camps, we know that in a lot of the schools there's no books. In the national schools in Turkana and Garissa, math books were last printed in 2011. So we're talking about, there's not a lot to work with, and so having these kind of very concrete practices, the team agreed made the most sense. I am so excited for you guys to see the groundbreaking practices that the team came up with. But I just want to quickly note, Sarah and Linda, in designing this, they focused within those activities on 3 key elements of sort of good implementation. The first was making sure that when you use these kind of fun approaches, that it is tied to learning. It's not just a transition activity, that it's tied to the learning objectives, that all students or most students have an opportunity to respond or practice or take part in the activity, and that there's a reflection at the end. That reflection is really important, so we're tying it back. And that is, again, it is nothing earth-shattering, and these are the earth-shattering approaches. It is real simple, but it is stuff that when we went and did learning trips to these classrooms, these things are not happening. And a lot of the reason why they're not happening is because teachers teach the way they were taught. And if you've had a more traditional learning experience, then you're not using so much of these approaches. So I will be excited for you guys to critique our selection of activities, but these ones were sort of, again, the best at meeting teachers where they are and encouraging more student-centered teaching. After talking to GK, I realize some of you may ask, okay, so you're giving teachers 5 to 7 new approaches to use in their classroom, you're adding to their burden, they've got to figure these out, they've got to risk losing control of their classroom in doing so. What are you going to make easier for them? What are you going to do to reduce their burden? The answer is not as much as we should. And one thing to note about these contexts, particularly in the refugee camps, is the dynamic is a little different than what I experienced maybe in Cambodia or Uganda or even Kenya working with national teachers, in that a lot of the refugee teachers have not been supported with any training before. And so for them, I think it's a little more naturally welcome in the sense of like, okay, well but nobody's provided us any resources. So yeah, I will take your games and your role playing. Thank you very much. I'll take the reference guide and look at it. What else have we done? So what we do include is example lesson plans. My goal is that someday no teacher will have to, I do think there's a value in writing out a lesson plan, but the 13-page form. So we provide as many sample lesson plans to reduce the time lesson planning as possible. We support the government's initiative to use communities of practice for resource sharing between teachers, so co-lesson planning, but also giving each other materials and this kind of thing. And then in terms of coaching and mentoring, the ministry advised and the project agreed that rather than just providing training and support to the head teacher as a mentor, head teachers are usually wrapped up with a lot of administrative duties, we would provide training and support to 3 instructional leads as well and deputy head teachers, so that at least the coaching and mentorship at the school is spread out and it's not just piling onto the head teacher. So like I said, it's not enough, but there have been ongoing discussions on how we can take away as we add in our requests. I will go pretty quickly through this school-based support. This is implemented in both the host communities and in the refugee settings. We don't, realistically, Tabitha Nduku is in charge of our school-based approach, and she said, she's like, realistically, I don't expect all my teachers to be logging into the virtual learning platform. I don't expect every school leader to visit their teacher once a month. The hope is that if we support the government in implementing, and these are all systematized, in implementing these with some financial support and material support, that maybe 1 or 2 will get through to the teacher. And so there will be some support to the teacher, realistically knowing that it's not all going, the teacher's unlikely to receive the full package. And so that is, I feel like this is not anything that's new or groundbreaking for you guys in terms of teacher support, so that's why I just wanted to kind of glaze through it. Now we can talk about my favorite thing, which I never thought would be my favorite thing, budgets. Love budgets. I don't want to, all politics aside, I'm just quoting him because he says hokey, salt of the earth things. Joe Biden always would say, and I know you can grow, but he would always say in meetings, he said, don't tell me what you value, show me your budget and I'll tell you what you value. And I think this is really, really true. And we can have all the best practices and all the right approaches in the world. If you don't have money for them, then it's not happening. And so, for example, we just, the team rolled out a training to 800 schools with 3,000 grade 1 to 3 teachers. I think I was hoping for like 2,000 grade 1 to 3 teachers, but it turns out that there are grade 4 teachers that also teach grade 3 math, and there are head teachers that also teach grade 2 reading. And so that's the first thing you run into. Like, do you, and I'm gonna ask you guys for your inputs on this because I struggle with it, do we train everybody that touches grades 1 to 3? Or, do you tell yourself that if you train one person, they'll roll it out to the rest of the teachers. Our training budget is not small. It's $690,000, which feels like it would go a long way. But one of the challenges of being in a remote rural area is it is way more expensive to train teachers to get to schools. When we first developed the budget for this project, the idea is that the ministry would employ the same national training approach that it employed under TUSOME, which RTI also implemented, which was a non-residential training that would be held at the zonal level. That's sort of the smallest administrative unit in the school system. And that the CSOs, who are basically the teacher coaches, teacher tutors, would go out and they would conduct these trainings at their zone. That was not realistic for Turkana and Garissa. In Turkana, some zones are still 200 kilometers wide. It's a huge county. In Garissa, some zones, it's really not safe to travel, particularly at night. You're completely fine when you are within a village, but being on the road traveling, especially for a woman, is not culturally accepted and it's not safe. And so we quickly realized this is going to be a residential training. And then another thing to note is, teachers aren't paid a lot of per diem. They get $16 to cover accommodation, meals, anything that they need while they're spending the night. But you also have to figure in, it's interesting, I think, because the transport to and from the training is the same as a day of training. And so this comes into play when we talk about best practices. So there's a lot of evidence that shows that you want multiple smaller trainings spread out through the year. And so this allows teachers to reflect and adapt and bring back their experience and it's grounded in all the best adult learning and professional development science. The problem is it becomes a lot more expensive when you have to bring teachers back and forth multiple times. Additionally, because the distances are so great in Turkana and because it's not always safe to travel at night in Garissa, you need to pay an extra day of per diem for people to spend the night or come and go. And meals and materials, we just increased the budget to $12 because, and I'll be transparent, we always make mistakes. I talked to our team in Kenya and I said, we're really tight on this budget. This was last year. Can you make the meals happen? Can you find vendors that will do the meals for $8 a meal? And they found the meals. Nobody got water, and it was 85, 95 degrees. And so then I was like, get the water, buy water, please. And so, lesson learned, especially when you are trying to establish a respectful, professional, trusting relationship with teachers, do not treat them, like you're trying to milk the budget as best you can. And so we've increased the meals and materials so that the lunches are a little nicer quality. So ultimately, to train one teacher for one day is $76. To train one teacher for 4 days consecutively is $160. And I point this out because it's like you're getting 4 days as much training for double the price. This is what we come up against. So then it's like, well, we've got to do 5 days of training, do we just bring everybody for a week? Sorry. I knew I would start waving my hands around, so too much. So I think let me just stop there because I've been doing a lot of talking. Anyone have any thoughts on what they would prioritize? Anyone raise your hand if you are in the camp for inviting fewer teachers and spending more time with the few you get? Okay, great. Who is in the camp of have fewer days of training but have that break in between for practice? Who is who's in the camp of, let's have more days of training and we'll just do it all at once? All right, not a lot of proponents of democracy in this room. I see a lot of non-voters. Yes, please.
How long is
the break? So a lot of evidence shows, you want to, the ideal is that the teachers receive the training, they are immediately providing follow-up support within 3 days back in their classroom, whether through its coach, peers, or virtual. That that encourages them to test the thing that they just observed. They test it out, and then sort of at the end of the term, after they've had an opportunity to, in theory, there's a lot of theories here. In theory, they are part of a community practice or peer coaching set up at the school. So then they are testing this out. They're talking to their friend. I'm like, GK, these people are nuts. This song thing is not working. And she's like, I know, let's throw that out. But I like the storytelling. How did you do the storytelling? And kind of, you go through that testing and adaptation practice to make it work in your classroom. And then you go back and you share with other teachers. And at this point, the facilitators are barely doing anything, and teachers are sharing their own experiences. That I have yet to see that happen that way, but in theory, this is how we support, teachers to be those testers. Yeah.
Then in those breaks, then there will be another budget.
Yes. So there is another budget, and we're going to get to those budget concerns next, because then you're kind of creating an unsustainable situation where we're going to talk about that. But yes, there's a separate budget for those in-between periods.
I feel like you just described the teacher relationships. It feels like it's because any training that I've personally undergone in the past, I think having a community where we're like sharing those ideas, and it was built almost deliberately during the initial training, even if they don't get the training again from the original trainers. If there's somebody who's like still trying but you're trying and the conversation continues, that is always more effective than if you're doing it alone and then you're like, this didn't work and I'm too tired and I'm like, oh no.
Absolutely, and teachers trust other teachers way more than they trust anybody else coming in to do. That's an excellent point. And I think there's been an increased effort to sort of build up that school level peer-to-peer support, because it is the most sustaining and the most meaningful from, coming from North America and from the West's perspective. We haven't spent enough time, we either need to not worry about documenting it, and if it's happening, let it happen. And we haven't done a good job measuring that, and maybe that's fine. Or we need to find a good way to measure that kind of cultural aspect, having that culture within your school of support. But right now, we're terrible at researching that. We just kind of glaze over it. So virtual learning, RTI partnered with two Kenyan-based organizations, Mshule and Dignitas. Mshule developed the teacher support platform, and they have a really brilliant, it's app-based, but there's also an SMS-based response module. So they do a short code so that the exchange is paid for in advance, and they enroll learners, and so they can track all the data, but it also works in low network settings. And Dignitas is it's more app-based and WhatsApp-based, but that one is for school leaders. And so we find like smartphone network or internet prevalence higher with school leaders, so they have kind of a different approach. I think you guys have studied virtual learning platforms and all, I know that Dr. GK only endorses them as a silver bullet that is going to save every education system. I think the Mshule and Dignitas platforms are brilliant, and they're brilliant because it was companies within Kenya that developed them to work in a Kenyan school system. But I'm going to let you guess what the module completion rate is in Turkana and Garissa counties. It's like The Price is Right, guys. It's a percentage between 1 and 100. Yeah, I see people shyly pointing down. Get this man paperclip prize. So not high. But who can guess what the re-engagement rate is? So if someone completes a module, the likelihood that they'll complete a second or third module. Aha! Ding, 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 ding. So what does this tell you? And maybe it's just that the people who are completing it are the good students that would complete every module anyway, or maybe they see a value in it, and so then, you know, it's like once they've gotten through it, they want to do it again.
Where there's like a startup, like an initial access process.
There you go. And when we did a follow-up survey, we found that about 18 to 22% of teachers' phones were just off when we called them to find out. So yeah, for sure, for sure. I thought it was interesting. We did some, so Dignitas and Schule called a large sample of teachers and head teachers and asked them, you know, why they hadn't completed the module. They were signed up, they had access, they didn't complete them. And I want you guys to guess what the #1 most talked about barrier was. And it was not technology, surprisingly. Yes. Boom! You should not make them even write a policy paper. Just graduate them all. That is exactly what it was. Oh, and really positive responses. I want to do it. I started it. I just got to get back to it. I got to get time. I just got to finish grading these papers. Da, da, da. Teachers do not have time. So now the question for my team is, and they laugh at me because I have a lot of opinions until stuff gets hard. And then I'm like, you guys are the experts. And they're like, oh, now what? So, you know, we can't do much about the technology. They've already, you know, Schule has introduced the SMS platform, and that's sort of the most effective way to reach all types of cell phone. And we can't really do much about, we can't free up time for teachers. So then what do you do to respond? That is an open-ended question. You were in the position of Sarah and Linda, who are experts. What would you do? Yes.
Try to convince them of the value of it, so it's worth their time if it's making their teaching more effective.
Yeah, and make sure there's a value to, you know, like make sure there's a value. I think we have some evidence that it is valuable, but that's a good point. What else? So that's a really good question. There is an incentives module, and so I think if you complete a certain number, you get like a little bit of mobile money, or you get a certificate. You completed it. Which, but sometimes, honestly, and you know what, one of the things that MSHLE does that I think is brilliant is once people complete one module, they call it, and they're like, great job, like what did you struggle with, what did you, and there's like, they have university interns actually, whose job it is to call and give that interpersonal support. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's I think that is a very fair point. I've been asking, the team's been asking about the stipends. I think it's a little tricky, it's particularly tricky in refugee camps. Because any kind of cash going in can do harm, risks harm, and so it's a little tricky. Credentialing, yeah.
That might mean something. How long is it?
That's a great question. So this is where it gets a little tricky. Each lesson is 10 to 15 minutes, but the modules themselves are over an hour. And so one of the things that the team decided is, let's call a lesson a module and a module a nothing. And we'll just make it, you know what I mean? Like, the team is, what they're doing is they're running a bunch of, everyone used to say RCTs, now we're all saying A/B tests. So when you end up in job interviews, you're like, oh, I would just run it. If you don't know the answer, I would run an A/B test. The team is running a bunch of A/B tests in 4 zones to see what kind of value add schemes resonate most with teachers. And then they're also looking to redesign. That's a really good point. Just make a person feel a sense of completion in Duolingo time and not in like university time. It's a great. Oh, who had ideas? Yes.
Not realistic, but like we have longer devices for teachers, and probably we give us the schools at any time, so that they don't have to make like a separate time to sit on their computers and do it. It's unrealistic, I know.
Well, but I I think it's a really good point, and it gets back to the idea that like, we're not working in a system that's just full of gaps. It's a system that's full of resources, and a lot of schools have taken it upon themselves to find, to like build or get solar panel chargers, to find different ways of electrification. And so I think, I wouldn't dismiss it so quickly. I don't think it's something that makes any sense for an outside project to do, but it's a discussion that can be brought forward with school leaders to say, hey, so, 20% of your teachers don't have regular access to their phones. Not putting the problem on the schools, but looking at what resources can be leveraged. And so maybe it's, spending a little bit less money to ensure that the solar chargers are working, or they have batteries, or, there's other ways to put in to put in less funding, but tap into existing resources that are there.
Do you know if the virtual modules are abilities and athletes?
So that's a great question. There's a combination of text, video, and pictograph or image. And the videos are really, really nice. The videos are rarely accessed, because even if I have a smartphone, two trends that have been documented by the team. One is that people that are active on WhatsApp regularly get so many spam videos in their chats that they just like ignore them, they glaze over them. And for those people and then the other group of sort of like routine WhatsApp smartphone users are conserving their data. And so the SMS is a free exchange, but the data for like a video watching is not necessarily, and so that creates a challenge. And I think, because I think it's a shame. The videos, after this talk, I'll share with you the links. The videos are awesome. Like, I love the videos, and they really are good, and they're entertaining, you learn a lot from them, but they're not tapped into a lot, because I think, most people are just trying to get through the module on their phone and like not at no expense to themselves, which makes perfect sense. Anything else? Yes. And that is a lot of what Lutheran World Federation is working on from a policy and advocacy side. The challenge, and I don't mean to just shoot it down with challenges, that is a great idea. That is one of the things that they are working on. One of the challenges is that from the government's perspective, if you offer all of these additional certifications and credentials, their pay grade also increases. And so there's constantly a cost implication for, again, the government that, as one finance minister said to me, I only have so many bills in my wallet, so, what do you want me to do with them? What time is Q&A now? Okay, I'll quickly, but thank you guys, because you have given me a couple things to think about and to take back and share with the team that I don't think that we were entertaining very much before, so thank you. Really quickly, mental health and psychosocial support. This is not my wheelhouse. IRC are leaders in this. They have developed a great module. But what I like, so they do a 3-day training with refugee teachers, as I might have mentioned. We are adopting some of that for host community teachers. It'll be more of a 1-day training. So I was talking to one of our coaches, and she was telling me that she had been to a classroom, and it was in a host community, and the teacher was like, students from different backgrounds, including from refugee camps, and students that definitely had experienced violence and trauma, at least some of them. And she said 3 times during the lesson, students were grabbing the teacher's rear end, and in a sexual way. And this was a grade 3, grade 4 mixed classroom. And the coach at the end was asking the teacher, like, why did you let that happen? Like, that's not okay, and it's not okay for you. And the teacher was like, she's like, some of these kids, they've experienced so much sexual assault. She's like, I just, not that they can't help it, but she's like, I just let it go, because I have to keep going with my lesson, and it's just, it is what it is. And so, you know, she told me that, and I was like, well, I don't have a clue what to say to that teacher. You know, like, I truly have no idea in that cultural context, in that setting, dealing with what that teacher is dealing with day to day, knowing, you know, only a fraction of what those students have dealt with in their lives, what to say. And so what I really like about IRC's approach to mental health and psychosocial support is it goes back to what you were talking about. It is not about, you know, whether you pick cognitive behavioral therapy or psychotherapy or any, it is just about, first off, breaking down walls and talking about mental health, sending the message that mental health is as important as physical health, and communicating to teachers, here's some signs that you're not okay, here's some physiological signs, here's some emotional signs. If you're not sleeping, like, it's not just you not sleeping. And then really emphasizing that it's okay to not be okay, that these are really tough jobs. And then most of all, engendering sort of a supportive environment in which teachers are safe to go to other teachers or their school leader to talk about mental health issues. And this is tough to do. It's tough to do in any school because, you know, it's you're creating a vulnerability for employees to their boss. But I think I just wanted to flag that, and because I thought it was really interesting. I hear, you know, we hear about a lot of challenges like that example, and I just wanted to share it because it's hard to know how to respond, and so the best response that IRC is sort of pushing for in their trainings is just to talk to people about it, and to be a trusted, empathetic peer when someone else is talking to you about challenges they're facing. I put this up because I don't know what to do about coaching, and I want to hear from you guys. Coaching is driving me. I have, on different days, I'm like, we got to go all in on coaching, and the other days I'm like, it doesn't matter. So I just put up Grumpy Cat because I was trying to think of how to frame coaching, you know, based in different frameworks of teacher change and teachers, and then I was like, I don't know how I feel about it. So I want to hear how you guys, who are studying more recent evidence than a lot of what I look at, are seeing this. And so I want to, again, do a show of hands, and then we'll wrap it up. So, raise your hand if you agree. The presence of a coach matters more than coaching quality. Not a popular opinion. We'll get there. A short-term influx of non-government coaching support makes sense to help teachers when they first implement new approaches. You don't have to agree with just one, and you don't have to make that face at every one of my statements. No additional funding should be invested in government coaching systems unless it can be maintained, and guidance to coaches should not ever be given by a non-government actor. Oh wow, a bunch of colonizers in here. Interesting. Okay. So you don't have to pick one over the other, but I keep coming back to these challenges. So for example, with the first statement, the presence of a coach matters more than coaching quality. I was just looking at some of our coaching data from the coaching that's done by head teachers and by coaches that visit the schools. And I was like, oh, I wonder how much people are doing role playing, because I think role playing it's a little hard to do. Well, it said that 85% of teachers were doing role playing in the lesson they were observed. And I was like, that seems high. And so then I looked at the, you know, IRC came in and did a baseline, sort of coming in as an objective external partner to look at where teachers were. And it was like 85% of teachers weren't doing role playing. And as much as I want to believe in our 3-day training, or 2-day, we started with a 2-day training, by the way. I can tell you about it over lunch. As much as I want to believe in our initial 2-day training, like that's wild. And then I looked at the data, and I saw that 85% of those same lessons also had songs. And 85% of those lessons also had games. And I was like, wow, there is a lot happening in this 30-minute maths lesson. And so I was like, of course, Rachel, this is not about data for you. this is about the interaction between the coach or mentor and the teacher, right? And so don't analyze it, you know it's not reliable, and the interaction matters. And the other part of me was like, well, if the coach thinks these things are happening and they're obviously not happening, I don't know how much quality feedback they're giving, right? And so I had mentors who said, it doesn't matter what the interaction is. The coach showing up for a teacher, particularly in a remote rural school, is what matters most. That sends the message that this matters, that you matter, that you know you are a respected professional. In terms of the second, and one area where I think governments, including Kenya, I think it was measured in Senegal and Ghana as well in some studies, one place where governments have made great improvements is in the tone and the approach of coaches coming from the district and county level to support teachers. And so it used to be that you would send inspectors to do coaching. That works as well as you would imagine. Now the inspectors have been told to be nice and smile, and that is actually having a huge impact on sort of the trust in the relationship. So that's positive. In terms of the short-term influx, you know, this is a tough one because I look at, it costs, you know, we pay government coaches $23 to visit each school. I have never once worked on a project where when the project ends, those visits are continued. That's a lot of money for a county government to sustain. And so you're kind of like, well, why did we do this? And I had another mentor who says, look, you're just trying to, you know, they're doing stuff for the first time, you're trying to get that intensive support, you know it's not gonna last. On the flip side, Turkana and Garissa counties have a 20% teacher transfer rate. So yeah, you know, it's like you're making this investment, but within 2 years, half of those teachers aren't going to be in those schools anymore. And so there's no answer, but I just wanted to point to some of the complexities of this. And I think one of the things to emphasize is I think you teach about decentralization. I heard 2 students already in just the walk over here and coffee talk about weak decentralization. And I think that's also what we're coming up against with the coaching issue, is that when a coaching model is miraculously not being dictated by a donor or an implementing project, it's being dictated by the national government. And so in an ideal world, it is the district and the county and the sub-county governments that are deciding on a coaching model that works best for their culture, geography, system, economy. But what's happened is, I know you guys have probably talked about this idea of like post office decentralization, where there's decentralization and there are county and sub-county offices of education, but they are not given sufficient budgets to work with, and they're also not given sufficient decision-making power. There's really not a lot that is under their purview ultimately. And so they're sort of stuck. And so I think until we can address that issue, it's going to be an ongoing challenge. So looking forward to next year, the team is enjoying a lot of trust that they've built up, and systems work is all about trust. And like Sarah can go to the ministry and she has her counterpart there and they greet each other and they have tea and they, you know, they're trusted advisors to each other. They're never gonna pull the rug out from each other, and that is systems work. Like when you go in and provide technical assistance to a government, you're not providing technical assistance to a government. You are collaborating with someone else who's an expert in what they're doing, and if you don't have that relationship, then like just get on the airplane and get out or whatever. Just focus on training best practices with the refugee settings. And then really focusing on that county level decision-making and reflection. I am sharing a photo of Amina Ali, and she's one of our curriculum support officers. She's based in Turkana, and the team just did a couple profiles, including on her. She has been teaching since 1994. I think some of you were probably born after 1994. I was not, most of you, I was 9. So it's, you know, like, it's like she knows what she's doing. And so a lot of our focus in year 3 is tapping into the resources and the wealth of knowledge of the Aminas and kind of focusing, now that we've gotten trust established at the national ministry level, focusing more on supporting the county and sub-county levels to just really facilitate discussions and setting priorities and taking a step back and kind of hearing more from county level officials who they really are like the experts in how to take things forward with the integration. So now I'm finally done. Thank you.